We're
Jonathan,
live.
I think we are live. What do you think?
I think we are. The big red button's on.
Okay, well, that's enough. I think we've made our points. I'll see you. So, cheers.
We've got a lot to go through,
No, we
and
do. We do. We're going to be here for another 5 to 7 hours, folks. So please settle in, get your chips and all that, and get ready. And tea, if you're in
I
England, of
think people will
course.
drop out if they think it's a 7 hour marathon.
Nah,
But
we're going to be
don't
here
worry.
for
It's
hopefully
one
an
hour.
hour, Jonathan. I think
It's an
something like
hour.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. We had discussed off air, and I think I briefly put out on my channel that we're going to be discussing Ukraine and Russia, which we are. But as I just said to you off air, I think we would be negligent. At least I think so. If we didn't, at least at the top of the live stream, mention the incredible victory of Zoran Mamdani as the socialist Democrat mayor-elect of the biggest city in America, New York City, in direct defiance of Donald Trump's anointed candidate, Andrew Cuomo. Um, so I just think that's incredible. I know some folks are going to give me, grief here over that. I'm not a socialist Democrat. Don't get me wrong. I'm not even a Democrat. I don't believe in any political parties. I'm not a member of a political party. Democrats have a lot of issues, not as much as our current Republicans. However, I think the fact that Mamdani won as an avowed, official, social Democrat, Jonathan, just shows the effect that, at least in some areas, major cities at least, Trump and MAGA have had on substantial numbers of the electorate who may not be socialists or Democrats themselves, but wanted a drastic change from what they've seen over the last, I say, 10 months of the Trump administration.
Could we see this as a protest, in partly at least a protest against Trumpism? Is that one way to read
Absolutely.
it?
Well, that's the way it's been taken here because, as many of your viewers may know, we have a critical, what's called midterm elections coming up next year, 2026. And now with this push, and also I'll just have to mention two women Democrats won elections as governor in Virginia and New Jersey. One of them was the first woman ever, I think, to be the governor there, and the other is the second. But to be a Democrat, especially in Virginia, which is a pretty Republican state, is a statement against what's going on here right now with the Trump administration. It bodes very well, many people think, for the Democrats to retake the House of Representatives and the Senate next year in the midterm elections, which would absolutely handcuff Trump and MAGA from enacting any more of the really drastic policies that are trying to or starting to ruin or dismantle our democracy. So yes, this is being taken, and I think so, as a very positive sign, as a push against what Trump, MAGA, and the current Republican Party have been doing since January 20th.
There's some big assumptions in here, aren't there, David? And I don't want to be a sort of
No.
Cassandra or a misery on these,
Yep.
but one assumption is that Trump doesn't want to change the rules so that you have the appearance of a vote, but actually somehow it's gerrymandered, or that there's no vote at all. Or the third option here is that you have a full-scale invasion of Venezuela, some really big global event that sort of either changes the dynamic or gives them an excuse to suspend due process.
Well, don't leave out the invasion of Nigeria, for God's sake.
The Nigeria as well, yeah,
I mean,
really.
you can't forget that. No, I understand what you're saying. And I am not saying that this is going to mean the Democrats are going to win next year and take the government away from the Republicans, from the Trump administration. Not at all. I'm just being a little optimistic. Something I also left out, you talked about gerrymandering, which is a huge issue here in the States right now. California just passed a resolution where they are going to gerrymander some of their maps. So they're going to gain, I believe it's 5 Democratic seats in the House of Representatives, which, if that were just left as it is, would give the Democrats control of the lower house, Congress rather, the House of Representatives. Of course, that's being, countered by what's going on in Texas and Indiana and some other states with the Republicans redrawing the maps, gerrymandering. So Look, but what you said is crucial. There's a possibility, and I'm not being hyperbolic. There is a possibility we may not have elections next year. And I'm not the only person saying that. Many people, much smarter than me, political scientists, analysts, pundits, and so forth, are saying that what we're seeing right now in America, meaning the deployment of military, National Guard, active duty military, and all the federal law enforcement officers, is a precursor to the Trump administration denying or calling an emergency next year prior to the elections, where there won't be elections, crying foul, and that the troops and the law enforcement have to seize the polling places or the polling machines or something, and not have an election at all, essentially martial law or something along those lines. It is believed by many people that that is what we're seeing the early stages of now with these deployments of the military and federal law enforcement in several American cities.
I mean, that is deeply disturbing, but it does seem to be a dress rehearsal for something. And these horrific scenes of people being dragged out of their vehicles, uh, children snatched from the hands of parents, people even being sort of beaten up outside law courts when they've gone for various hearings to do with not just deportation but actually confirmation of their status to remain. I mean, this familiarization with not just a militarized police, which, let's face it, you've had several decades of that already, but with actual military forces, which goes contrary to the very doctrine, the founding doctrines of the US military. They are not supposed to be there for sort of so-called civic law enforcement. But this appears to be getting people used to the idea, testing the boundaries of normalcy. And unfortunately, there seem to be few, if any, guardrails to stop it.
Well, it's funny. I just watched a brief video today, and I forget what the website was, but it was about an arrest made in Moscow, Russia, of a person who was alleged to have passed information to Western intelligence about the Russian forces in Ukraine, and it showed the arrest. It was a propaganda piece. They wanted to show how harshly the FSB deals with traitors. And so it showed the arrest, and sure enough, there were civilian clothed FSB operatives masked, so you couldn't see their faces. And you know what, Jonathan? You could have superimposed that on America right now with Homeland Security and what they're doing in the Border Patrol and ICE when they seize Americans, some of them American citizens, green card holders, what have you, off the streets. They look the same. They're dressed the same. And for the first time in American history, we've got masked agents of Washington, D.C., of the federal government, snatching people off the street. Secret police, in essence. And I'm sorry, that's wrong. That's just not what America is about. And that's got to stop.
And what one thing that sort of endlessly puzzles me about this situation is the police, basically, whether they think it's right or wrong, seem to not either have the jurisdiction to intervene or are making a very conscious decision to not intervene. Whereas what we see playing out is essentially lawlessness. It's a lack of due process. It's not the execution of any kind of due process. And actually, I mean, you mentioned the Russian police. This reminds me more of the 90s, where various paramilitary police forces in Russia were basically bought out or owned or partly controlled, for some operations at least, by oligarchs. They might be affiliated with the state in one instance, but another instance, if they're being moved against somebody's business, they will move in force at the behest of one oligarch, say, against another, whoever's paid them off or has influence on that piece of turf. It seems to resemble much closer to that, actually, when I see this play out. It's to call it the execution of law is really not what we're seeing here.
No, and for people that are not native to the United States, and even if they are not really conversant in our history, in the Constitution, in the foundational principles, it's probably not as dramatic or as controversial to see these types of incidents happening on the streets of America, because they may be from countries where this is how it is. And that's how their police forces react or act out on the streets. I'm telling you, folks, This is not what America is all about. And before we go any further, I have to say again, I think as I always do, I am not for open borders. I was a harsh critic of the Biden administration when he essentially opened the border, the southern border with Mexico, and didn't enforce our immigration laws. I'm almost for closed borders, at least for a while, until we get a handle on who's coming across our borders. I'm pretty conservative. I have a law enforcement background. I'm not a tree hugger. I'm not a progressive, whatever you want to call it. Um, so I believe in
You're a
enforcing our immigration laws. Yeah, I'm not
pinko,
a secret covert pinko here. No, I believe in immigration laws and enforcing them. But I don't believe in secret police. And some of the writers are already saying, crying secret police, blah blah blah. Well, you know what? What would you call people that have friggin' masks over their face so you can't see them? That's what's known as secret, if you speak English. And
well,
we
let's face
don't
it, they
have
don't
secret
declare any
police forces.
warrants.
Well,
They're going
it's
after
without a
the.
warrant, without due process, without probable cause, just snatching people off the street
They're
by
not checking the
masked
license plates of
agents.
these people. That's not being flagged. There's no warrant to go in. There's no warning of
No.
someone's rights. There's no judgment as to whether someone's armed or not. They're literally smashing in the windows of random people's cars and dragging them out. This resembles Georgia and a process called Titushki. It does not resemble any due process of law that play out anywhere
And they're
in the Western world.
disappearing them, just like all dictatorships do, Jonathan. I mean, they're taking them often to undisclosed federal holding facilities and not telling their families or their attorneys. How is that a democracy or a constitutional republic?
That's it. And then you come to the point where they actually eject people from the country. So this is where I think the comments will go, well, if they have no right to be in the country, then this is like, fair enough. But no, where they're being sent are prisons. And there are compelling narratives of people turning up in, say, El Salvador in these custom built sort of, I don't know if they're custom built, but these prison facilities, and guards telling people that they will not get out of there alive.
Yeah.
So essentially, that's a failure of not just due process, but the accountability of the state.
Well, I'm glad to see that you have a lot of trolls here too. I mean, they're
Yeah.
laughing at things that I say, like they're disappearing them, secret police, and all of that. And I'll say what I usually say: Do they have their heads up their ass, or is this something new that they're saving just for me? As I always say to them, have you always been this stupid, or is this something new? Yeah, they're disappearing them. If you take somebody off the street and you take them somewhere that you don't tell anybody and their family and attorneys don't know where they are, what would you call that, Einstein?
Well, the question then comes, what happens next? Because once you create a pattern of tolerance for this, or you realize that there are no guardrails to prevent this happening, then the natural progression of this, and again, people in the comments are going to be like, oh, you're exaggerating. But if we described to you 18 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what's happening now, you'd have said we're mad.
Yeah.
The idea of the US, invading Venezuela, the idea of the talk about sort of Greenland, Panama,
Nigeria, don't forget
Canada.
Nigeria. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Nigeria, let's not forget Nigeria. The fact that Canada is reorienting its entire export economy and thinking about how it can bolster the border because it now sees the US as a direct threat. I mean, if you describe all this stuff to people from 2 or 3 years ago, even though they've lived through the first Trump administration, they think you were mad. Now we're talking about where this comes next. And where in the pattern of authoritarian behavior it comes is they start going after their political enemies. They start going after Obama, Hillary Clinton. They're already going after Comey and Bolton. They're locking people up when there's really no due process there and no real cause. And then they just randomly start going after anyone who opposes them or might oppose them.
Well, I mean, they've already indicted how many, not just Bolton. I mean, the former director of the FBI, Comey, the special prosecutor. Oh no, Comey, the special prosecutor Jack Smith. They're looking at Hillary Clinton. You mentioned Bolton already. They're looking at the former director of the CIA, Brennan. He's going after. He has a list of his political enemies, all those who wronged him, meaning they investigated his criminal activity. And now that he's president, he's going after them. This is a revenge tour. He said he would, and he is. And anybody that supports that doesn't understand what a democracy is about, or a constitutional republic. If you support a president or the leader of a country going after his political enemies like this just because they try to hold him accountable, well, I have nothing further to say except you don't understand what it means to live in a democracy.
And of course, turning to Russia on this one, this gives extraordinary narrative material to Russia to say, well, look, we always told you this is what the US was. We always told you this is how they behaves. Not necessarily true for much of the last century, but this is what they are. We told you so. There's no such thing as democracy, and then they crack on with trying to subvert and degrade the few democracies that are still standing. This doesn't play out well on the big picture, and here you have Ukraine that understands the difference between freedom and non-freedom, between democracy and authoritarianism, and they're throwing everything into the fight to try and prevent the light going out in their part of the world.
Well, what I said before, Jonathan, I have to say it now because it's a perfect lead into what you just said. I don't want to keep dwelling on America because a lot of the viewers are not that attuned to it. And we did say we're going to primarily talk about Ukraine and Russia. I've said and I've written, and I'll say it again now, Ukraine, in my opinion, is the torch bearer. They are the beacon of democracy in the Western world. I'm very ashamed to say that America has lost that title. We did have it, whether people want to admit it or not, but we are no longer the beacon of light. We're no longer the shining city on the hill, as America has been referred to in the past. That's passed to Ukraine and the brave Ukrainians. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. And I think NATO and EU are starting to realize that, and at least I hope they do. So anyway, I just had to say that. I'm very ashamed. I mean, I am a veteran of the American military. I fought in combat for America. I'm very proud to be an American, although recently I've had many, many days where I'm embarrassed to be an American. But I believe we should all, us in Western democracies, rally behind the true standard bearer for Western democracies right now, and that is Ukraine.
That's it. And of course, we now have a pivotal battle, because I know we've got a bunch of topics we want to get through, but I think it's important to mention Pokrovsk, where one of perhaps the most impactful and strategic battles of the whole war is playing out at this point. Russia's been going at this for 21 months now, and they have not taken over this city. We've got some notes in there. We've got a really bad echo, which I tried to get rid of earlier. But I don't know if there's a way to.
I'm sorry, but I can hear you fine, but apparently our viewers cannot. There is that bad echo, and so I apologize to the viewers for the bad audio. We're not quite sure what's going on yet.
Yeah, I haven't quite figured that out. If we do get a solution to that, then we will implement that. So apologies to everyone there.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Pokrovsk. Russia has been desperate to take that eastern Ukrainian city. And what's the latest? You may know better than I do. The latest casualty figures for the Russian army, and we may have temporarily lost Jonathan. For those of you who don't know, Pokrovsk is a rather small city. Hold on, Jonathan may be back. I think he is. And there he is. And let's see if the echo is gone.
Let's see.
You're frozen, so maybe the echo's gone and you're just frozen video.
Could be. Let's see if we can get this working.
It's part of that hybrid warfare, Jonathan. I know that you're being jammed.
I think it is. Yeah, that could be it.
It's the second floor of that building in St. Petersburg, Russia, where the GRU operate.
Yeah. Well, let's hope they're not sitting outside in a parked van.
Well, no, I don't think so. Still echo. I'm reading the comments. There's still echo.
There's still echo, but let's crack on. I don't think we can fix it.
We're going to have to go with that, and folks, we're really, really sorry. Don't know the technical issue right now, but we're just going to have to go with it. And again, we really apologize. We're talking about Pokrovsk. And do you know the approximate casualty figures for the Russians? Because they have thrown just tons of their troops against that village. Actually,
It's huge, of course. It's absolutely huge, and there is reported that they're throwing about 160 to 170,000 bodies at this problem at the moment, and trying to rustle up more people. The original population was around sort of 60, 70,000 of Pokrovsk. Um, it is likely that Russia has lost, in terms of killed and injured, tens of thousands to capture that place, and of course they're busy turning it into a pile of rubble, as they've done with Avdiivka and Bakhmut before it.
yeah. I mean, and the reason they're doing this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that is not a major, but a fairly significant transportation hub that they would be able to then better control their logistics in that area, which is a severe problem for them right now because the Ukrainians are blasting the hell out of their command and control centers, logistical centers, whatever convoys they try to send to the areas. If they try to use the rails and all that, the Ukrainian drones and artillery are just smashing the hell out of them. So they're desperate to get a foothold in that area so they can have some kind of a logistical hub to get supplies and personnel into that area and further through Donbass. And there's so far not very successful, except successful in getting their own people killed and maimed.
This is it, but they don't have any compunction about that. There's no upper limit to the number of people they're willing to sacrifice for this. The other outcome, of course, is that if they physically do take the city in its entirety, which may take many more weeks, in fact, then someone just said if you mute your microphone while I'm speaking, that might cure it. I don't know if that necessarily would. There is a propaganda victory that Russia could have here. That coming into the winter, the regime is under a certain amount of pressure to show results. It is demanding more resources, more people to rustle up to continue this struggle. And if they can't show any kind of victory, I think that is going to be challenging for them.
Well, I agree with you. And I think this is true. And for those who may not know, Russia right now under Putin is going to implement a major conscription push. This is during their usual time period. I believe it's October to April. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at least starting in October. But this year, they are really going to make a more major push. And I mentioned to Jonathan before we went on, I know a young man who 25 years old, who just escaped, got out of Russia in the last couple of weeks because he was about to be conscripted and had absolutely no desire to be drafted into the Russian army and have his butt shipped over to Ukraine. They are desperate to get personnel in there. There's a new order from Putin. They're going to be organizing reservists now, especially from the eastern oblast, the eastern provinces where the indigenous people in Russia live, to guard their refineries, which are getting, and we should talk about this soon, which are getting just blasted by Ukrainian drones further and further into Russia, into the Russian heartland. So the Russian manpower issue is just getting from bad to worse, even though they outnumber the Ukrainians at least 3-1.
That's absolutely right, and I think this is going to be the critical sort of inflection point there. It's going to be whether Ukraine can scale this up. If they can scale that up significantly, the strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, the question is, where do they point it to? Is it going to be just logistical nodes or hitting army infrastructure? What we're seeing, however, is a suggestion they're starting to hit electricity substations. They're taking the lights out around certain key cities. You mentioned Vladimir. It's happening around Moscow, and not just where there are military installations. I think they may be testing the water for a lights out campaign to essentially trip Moscow to the point where people lose the will to keep supporting this war.
Talking about the war, actually not talking about echoes. My mic is now unmuted, but I've done something with echo cancellation. So, folks, would you let us know if we're still echoing to you, or whether there's been any change in this for the better? I hope.
Let's see.
I think it looks
That might have hurt. Yeah, that seems to have gone.
okay.
I can't hear it in my ear now anymore as well, and you're unmuted. There we go. That seems better.
Yeah, we're both unmuted.
And
Although
we've both
a lot
got
of people
echo cancellation on.
absolutely.
So that's good. Yeah,
Some
yeah.
people tell me that I should always be muted, but that's another issue which we won't get into right
We
now.
might do a vote at the end, you know.
Well, yeah. No, seriously, I'm glad that it's fixed, folks. I know how annoying that can be. But we were talking a little bit right now about the manpower shortages in Russia. The latest figures are well over 1 million Russian service men and women have been either killed or wounded. Many of them maimed very badly. They still employ security forces behind the frontline troops that if any of them try to escape, try to run away from the front lines, they're shot, which has been a practice in the Russian and then Soviet army, and before that, the Russian Empire for hundreds of years. It's pretty barbaric, but that's Russia. They love these full-scale these full-scale attacks on the front lines, and they don't care how many of their own people are killed or maimed or wounded. And they're seeing the effects of it right now. They're starting to have manpower issues, which for a country of that size is unbelievable.
It is. And given the number of people in absolute poverty, given the number of people in the provinces and in these ethnic minorities that they could potentially use, I think it's an indication of how badly the strategy is backfiring. It's expensive. It's complicated to administer, getting 30,000 bodies a month to join the military. And the tactics aren't massively changing. Yes, they've got a few elite drone units. They've got some innovation in tactics, infiltration tactics. But ultimately, this isn't, grand warfare with, sort of maneuver operations, combined arms. All they haven't got this. They're dealing with mass, and often that mass isn't just firepower; it's just flesh, overwhelming Ukrainian positions, absorbing. So, and there are reports of the ratios. The ratios are anything from 3-1 at the low end in certain parts. I've heard ratios of 15-1 in terms of Russians being taken out. Now, everyone talks about the size of Russia, the scale of Russia. They cannot sustain a 15-1. I mean, that's just not feasible, even if your adversary is far smaller.
Absolutely. I want to also say that one of the things that I have said I had hoped for, I know that most people in the West have hoped for, was that somehow the Russian people, the civilians, the citizens would start to get angry, would start to get fed up with the war, that maybe their positions in Russia would start to decrease to the point where they would say enough and rise up. That hasn't happened, and it probably won't happen for a long, long time. However, I just want to say right now that with the Ukrainian strategy, brilliant strategy of attacking the refineries and the energy producing areas of Russia, the grid within Russia, it is starting to have an effect. I know some folks that live in Russia, in the Vladimir area, which is about 300 or so kilometers east, of Moscow. And that was hit twice this week, a refinery, an electrical station, rather, outside the city of Vladimir. And the people I know there don't have any electricity for the last 2 days. And they are not pro-Putin, but they're not against Putin either. They're typical Russians, I guess you'd call it, brainwashed. And Jonathan, you and I had discussed this before. They're not, well, I'm not going to say they're not bad people, but they're brainwashed. So they're starting to get a little upset. The fact that they don't have any electricity and they can't buy gasoline. Food prices are outrageous right now. People are, they just can't afford to live. It's been it's gotten from bad to worse. So I don't know. I'm not optimistic, but I think that with the Ukrainian strategy, as I said, of hitting the energy grid, knocking out these facilities, plunging Ukrainians into the dark, not allowing them to buy gasoline, or having it outrageously expensive, having their food prices expensive go through the roof. I think it is starting to have an effect. And you put that together with the oligarchs who are not happy. And you've done a lot of podcasts about that, about how the elites in the Kremlin are maybe getting together to do something with Putin. We may be starting to see the end of the Putin regime. What do you think, Jonathan?
I think that's a possibility. It depends whether it depends his inflexibility. Is he so far gone? Is he in some way experiencing the kind of, let's put it out there, cognitive decline that we observe in Trump, and actually observed in Biden as well, which sometimes can lead to poor decision making? Well, it layers on to characteristics people already have. In the case of Biden, one of his main characteristics was sort of caution and highly, I would say, managerial, quality there. So it doesn't lead to absolutely disastrous decisions, but it leads to non-decisions, like we saw in Ukraine. It leads to hyper caution. When you compare, I'm not directly comparing Biden to either Trump or Putin, it has to be said, though, because the outcome of let's say, cognitive decline combined with his characteristics are not great for Ukraine, but they're not overall an absolute disaster for the world, but they could be an awful lot better. The combination of these characteristics when it comes to Putin and Trump are devastating, because they're already inclined to make poor decisions. They're already inclined to certain, let's say, characteristics of their personality, whether it be narcissistic in terms of Trump, or whether it be, dare I say it, psychopathic when it comes to Putin, combined with a sort of Russian imperialism, exceptionalism. They will keep doubling down on their mistakes. And the question here becomes is, will Putin continue to do that? If he does, and I suspect he will, then this may well eventually lead to something that brings his regime down, because it becomes so at variance with reality, so at variance with Russia's capability to exert any kind of military strength moving forward, that we see some kind of systemic collapse. If he's not completely, immersed in his own propaganda, there may come a point where someone taps him on the shoulder and say, "Look, Vova, this is time to pivot. We're not saying stop the wars, just this one is done. Let's turn our attention to taking down the West in a different manner." That is kind of my big fear, actually. Now, it would let Ukraine off the hook, which is a good thing, but it would put the rest of Europe onto that hook. And I'm not sure we would necessarily fare quite as well. And of course, it would mean that the war maybe is no longer direct and kinetic in the way that the war in Ukraine is, but it could be an intensified form of hybrid confrontation.
Well, and as I've said before, and some of your viewers are saying the same thing, the Russian people can take almost unlimited misery. It's just conditioned into them for hundreds of years. So I don't believe they're going to rise up anytime soon. But
No.
as you've said, now and recently, the oligarchs, the oligarchs, as well as, of course, the heads of the security services and military, have the real power. Having said what you just did, how close do you think we are to seeing the oligarchs or the heads of the security services, the folks that have the actual power in Russia, from
I'm not sure.
any kind of a move against Putin?
I'm going to counter that. They have access to some resources, but ultimately all resources reside with the state. You are, as an oligarch, you may not think of it this way, but you're essentially leasing your power from the Tsar. So if, I don't think you would see them moving against the Tsar, but if the Tsar was suddenly to lose his power to arbitrate between them, his power to take one of them out capriciously to teach others a lesson. If he was to lose that kind of power of fear over them, then you may see them using their resources. Yes, they could conspire against him, but they're just as likely to conspire against each other. And this is probably what Putin's going to carry on doing. So rather than, the classic scenario of them organizing against Putin, it's far more likely that with his Chekist head on, and there's a lot of comments here in the chat about his Chekist background, he's far more likely to turn them against each other, steal the businesses from one in order to give to other loyalists who are more vicious, and set them against each other to keep his spot going. So I think what you're going to see is a process. Now, Google hates this comment, far more cannibalistic thing. So you may not see, a classic sort of regime collapse. You may see an extended process of Russia consuming more and more and more of that flesh, going right down to the bone in certain areas, while Putin still retains his throne. All the more reason why we should arm Ukraine to the teeth, give them everything they need, because this could take some time to play out.
Well, you mentioned that they would only perhaps make a move if they see that he's lost his ability to to harm them or to come down or to do something to them. How would that play out? How would how would they see that he's lost some of his abilities, and maybe there's an opening for them to make a move? How would that play out? What would he?
We've
have
seen
to
it
lose?
already. Prigozhin. We've already seen it in Prigozhin. The moment where Putin calls upon or is threatened directly in some sphere or other, and he calls upon the resources of the Siloviki and the resources of the loyalists to intervene against someone who is attacking him. And they all steadfastly stay in their barracks and refuse to come out. So that's the point at which that weakness becomes absolutely visible, I think. Is there another Prigozhin character? I'm not sure there is. I don't think Gherkin is really up to it. And he's in prison as well. He's obviously at the pleasure of the Tsar behind bars. So there isn't really a direct figure like Prigozhin, but I think that gives us a very easy to imagine scenario. And not only do you have the so-called Silovikian elites deciding they're going to sit this out to see who comes on top, you almost immediately had the populace just flipping and gravitating to the next strongman. I think that's what people are going to be looking out for, unfortunately. And we need to understand this about Russia. They are not looking for an emergent democrat. They're looking for the next strongman who is going to be stronger than the current guy, especially if the current guy gets weak. You want to look for somebody who's going to be able to instill order, or what they consider to be order, and security. And they will gravitate immediately to the biggest, baddest, nastiest guy who comes out on top of whatever fight emerges.
Who's the top candidates, in your opinion, for that when it happens?
I don't have them. I'm going to say Gherkin is probably one of the best known now after Prigozhin. But we don't know the currents and relationships beneath the surface. And Putin has assiduously prevented anyone from showing leadership qualities or emerging in this way. So we don't know who actually has these kind of characteristics when push comes to shove. What we can say absolutely is that the sycophants that surround him, such as Peskov and Lavrov and others, they're not it. They will not, come to the fore. They will either cozy up to the next strongman, or they'll be taken out of the courtyard like Beria and dispatched. They'll be there and suddenly they'll be gone. Yeah. So we don't know. We don't know who's going to emerge. And I think when it happens, there could be all sorts of surprises. The only surprise there won't be is that it will be another strong man. It will be another strong character, and it will be another. Not that Putin's a strong character. I mean, he was built up into appearing to be a strong character by the machine, as it were. He's rather a pathetic individual. But no, a strong character will emerge, and very, very likely it will be a man as well. Very unlikely it will be a
You
woman.
know, and as you're saying, his main MO, and it's been this way his whole career, is to sow chaos. He sows chaos within his own security services, within the military, within the oligarchs. So they're all fighting within each other. He keeps them all off balance, and that's a major reason how he stays in power. But to me, what's
Yeah.
so infuriating is that he's using that same Soviet/Russian methodology against the West in both his dealings with Europe and, unfortunately, in his dealings here in the United States. This chaos, always keeping the two different or several different parties and leaders at each other's throats, so no one really has the advantage. It's working really, really well here in the United States, and unfortunately, it's working too well in Europe right now. And even though I
It's working
think
very
that the
well. Yeah,
leader,
exactly.
yeah, well, even though the leaders see that, I'm sorry, the heads of the states in Europe, certainly the military leaders, intelligence leaders, they know what's going on, and yet the political will isn't there to come clean, to be honest with their own citizens, to fight against this and stop this chaos that's being perpetrated by the Kremlin. It's so aggravating to me.
And what they also know is that if Democrat leaders were to get sort of, especially in countries where their position is not that strong, we have Starmer, who has a large majority here, but politically is not that strong. We have Macron, who also we know has a brittle political position. The Kremlin knows that if these characters go too far in opposing them, too far in resisting it, they may actually lose the support of their own electorate and go the other way. And in fact, we know that France is on a knife edge with Le Pen, um, or whatever substitute she's going to nominate there. We've got Czechia, who just recently fell. Now, I'm loath to call him pro-Kremlin, but he's certainly aligned on many areas with Kremlin talking points. He's not a complete agent like Orban appears to be,
Yes.
or Fico, but certainly there are many decisions he's likely to make which are deeply disadvantageous to European democracy and to Ukraine in particular.
You got
Um,
Fizo, of course.
you got Fiso and you've got Orban. Now,
Yep.
of course, this balance can change, and Putin's not entirely in control. He thought he could flip Romania. He thought he could flip Moldova. He felt in both those instances. He thought he could destabilize Poland. Poland remains, I would say, or is getting even more confused and divided on the issue of Ukraine. And a big part of that is populist politicians in alignment with the Kremlin and a massive investment to destabilize and change public opinion. So this is a moving mosaic. As you say, what we're doing though is we're playing a whack-a-mole here. We're not looking at the broad strategy of divide and conquer, of polluting our institutional and information space, and we're not coming up with a coherent Europe-wide strategy to counter it, to create a firewall, to create the name of my channel, a silicon curtain. We had an iron curtain that kept more or less the Russian nonsense out of Western Europe. And we only achieved that by ceding Central and Eastern Europe to them. We gave away whatever it was, 100 million people or whatever. We gave away vast territories, vast populations, which, given normal politics, would have been European democracies, advanced industrial European democracies. We gave them all away to the Soviet sphere to protect ourselves. And let's be clear about that. Now we don't even have that. We don't even have that strategy to build a firewall against the Russian nonsense. We're allowing it into our phones, into our devices, into our institutions, and it's having a highly toxic and polluting impact.
Europe. Again, I'm going to cut out America for now. That's another for another podcast. Europe, NATO, and the EU are consensusing themselves to death. They don't have, as you just said, a unifying force right now. I hate to say it, but they need a strong leader, not in the sense that Russia thinks of a strong man or a strong leader, but they need someone to step up, someone with a spine that can look at what's going on and say, look, we need to change. that the times are past. We need to rewrite our charter. We need to change policies, whatever it takes, so that we present a unified front, a unified NATO, a unified EU to the Russian threat. We can't have 28 or 32 different voices looking at protecting their own territorial and economic fare.
Well, worse is when you have sort of 30 voting one way and one is allowed to block it.
Well,
Certainly
exactly.
that single vote,
That's got to stop.
that,
That's got to stop. I
yeah.
mean, they need to get unified. I don't know if that's going to happen fast enough, but that's the problem. And that is the divide, the chaos that Putin is exploiting, and exploiting very, very successfully. I just want to throw in here now, because we're starting to run up against the clock, but talking about all the disunited voices within Europe, they are going to try to become united on using the frozen Russian funds in Belgium. After all these years, Belgium, as your viewers may know, has been holding up the seizure of the approximately $300 billion dollars or pounds, however you want to look at, or euros, that are in a Belgian financial institution. Belgium finally agreed that they're going to talk with the leaders of the EU on Friday, a couple of days, to work out how to use those funds to support Ukraine. What they've been asking is that they want Europe, they want the EU to guarantee that they would support Belgium in the event that they do allow the funds to support Ukraine, and that Moscow attacks them financially and demands the money. They want the EU to backfill them, to guarantee that they will make good and they won't leave Belgium out to dry. I have been very critical of Belgium's stance on this, but if they actually reach an agreement on Friday to supply Ukraine with all or most of these funds, that will be a major, major breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we should, and I think there's a chance eventually we kind of get there, and I think they're working out the details now. They're working out the details of some kind of, security provision or risk sharing for Belgium. I think it's fair for them to ask that. It's not fair for them to sort of drag their heels quite so much. It's not fair for others to expect Belgium to move forward without united guarantees from all nations.
I agree.
But I think it'll happen. But the question here is, does any of this stuff happen in time?
Yes.
We should definitely get some comments here. But one person I was speaking to yesterday, who's been on the ground a lot in Ukraine, talks to a lot of commanders at the front. He says that, look, part of this depends on Ukrainian will. Part of this depends on, at the moment, it has to be said, Europe supplying Ukraine, because they're not going to get anything from the States, and they cannot depend on anything from the States, as we know right now. That's done. Maybe some stuff will be sold, maybe it won't, but the next 2 to 3 months is the critical timeline. So only Europe can provide the equipment, the scaled up equipment and munitions that Ukraine needs to help keep it in the fight through the winter. So the onus is completely on Europe to step up. And we've seen munition provisions and funds over the last 6 months. Now, the first 6 months in the wake of the Oval Office fiasco was pretty huge. Europe really stepped into the breach and covered the monies that previously would have come from the US. The second half of 2025 is looking dramatically lower, which is why there's a lot of pressure now for Europe to really scale up.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head about all of this. It's time. Do they have? Are they going to do it in a timely fashion? I believe that Europe is going to eventually, if Ukraine can hold out, supply Ukraine not only with the ammunition and weapons that they need, but with the financial support that they need. I mean, look, firms like Rheinmetall out of Germany are opening at least one, and I think maybe two major facilities in Ukraine to manufacture many weapon systems that the Ukrainians need. The UK and I believe France is also doing the same thing, and others as well. That's all great. I mean, but it should have been done 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And so I don't know whether all of that is going to happen in time. The Ukrainians have stepped up to the plate, though. As you know, they have been so innovative with their drones, especially. And the only thing that they're lacking right now is the space, the facilities to manufacture drones in large enough numbers, and more importantly, some of the engines for these more sophisticated drones and missiles, like the Flamingo, which I believe, when it's manufactured in large enough quantities, will change the face of the war. It might not win the war for Ukraine, but it's certainly going to give the Russians a lot of sleepless nights. But again, the Ukrainians lack the facilities right now to make or manufacture the engines for that. That's being taken care of, but whether that's going to happen in the next few months, I don't know. So it's all about timing. Is Ukraine going to get the material and financial backing they need from Europe in time? I don't know, but I pray that it does.
And I think we need to debate this. I mean, this is I'm going to take this comment as well intentioned by the person who put it here. I don't know. He might be a troll, he might not. But this certainly is something that I see even amongst many commentators who are pro-Ukraine but come from the sort of Republican sphere, that stick with it because Trump will come round. I think this is certainly not the framing I would have. Certainly Trump may have a bit of a spat with Putin. He may have a degree of falling out, but ultimately their perception of the world is similar, and it's an authoritarian, I would say fairly parasitical view of the world and how it works. It is not a generous view of the way the world works. That, to my mind, means that he will not come round to being pro-Ukraine. You may have Trump and Putin having a spat and using various entities as proxies in their war of narcissism, their war of ego. But that does not mean Trump will be pro-Ukraine. He might use Ukraine as a tool to get back at Putin, which is fine. We'll take that. We'll use that. But let's not delude ourselves into thinking that Trump is suddenly, Ukraine's biggest fan and suddenly appreciates why Ukraine's fighting and why democracy is important to them and why identity and freedom of expression. He doesn't give a rat's ass about any of this stuff. Let's not delude ourselves. But if he is going to fall out with Putin, then we should be ready to use it when it comes up.
He's never going to fall out with Putin to the point where he's going to supply Ukraine with what they need to win the war. Period. End of story.
It's highly unlikely.
How many lies and about faces do people need to get to have shoved in their faces before they realize that Trump, like you said, doesn't give a shit? Why don't people realize Trump is a deeply troubled individual, meaning he has behavioral issues. I believe he has dementia. I think he also probably had a stroke. Before that, he was a complete asshole, and now he's just gone beyond the pale. I don't mince words with him. He's destroying my country. He's destroying my democracy that I fought for. So I have nothing good to say about him. And if anybody thinks that he's going to help Ukraine, they're crazy. And I think that last comment was a troll. If I'm wrong, then it's an extremely.
I don't think it is, because Hooves is posting some other stuff here, which is more balanced. Trump only cares about dollar. Yep. And he also posted that Trump will throw anyone under the bus. So you've got an interesting mixture of comments there, So I think it's the genuine person who's trying to, come to terms with the confusion of what's going on, and not necessarily as an anti-Trumper, but can see that there's characteristics there which are. But if we can use them, that's great. The trouble is we don't have any demonstrable evidence, really. Well, we do have one, and that is the provision of intelligence data. I still find it sort of interesting. Maybe that's because it doesn't cost Trump anything. But the US has made a marked difference in the last couple of months of providing intelligence data to hit Russian energy sites. That's kind of interesting.
It doesn't cost him anything, but he doesn't understand it. Well, he doesn't understand it. I'm serious. He doesn't really when the Ukrainians came to him, or his own military folks here said, well, Mr. President, let's continue to give Ukraine intelligence information. He doesn't even know what that means. So yes, it doesn't cost anything, so that's an automatic okay. But he also doesn't know what it means. Trust me, he doesn't know what that means.
Intimate. So they've packaged it in a way like, you don't need to worry about this. Costs us nothing. Keeps our other allies off our back.
Yep.
And let's just do this. And that means we don't have to do tomahawks. We don't have to do anything physical
Yeah.
and costly. And yeah, it's a sleight of hand, as it were, which suggests there are many people still somewhere in the Pentagon who really want to help Ukraine and trying to find
Oh, there are
devious ways of doing
many
it.
many people in the Pentagon, in the Congress, both the Senate and the House, especially the Senate, who do want to help Ukraine, who are deeply troubled by what's going on in the White House and the Pentagon under Hegseth with their anti-Ukrainian feelings. But they are, they're Republicans. They're part of the cult, and they are afraid to speak out.
Let's remind people that Hegseth wore, and this is not up for debate anymore because we've looked at the online shops, he wore a Russian flag tie
Yes.
to a meeting with Zelensky. I mean, whether it's crass or whether it is some kind of just trolling or some deep signaling of alignment, none of these are, reasons to justify that kind of behavior. It's an obscenity, quite
Well,
frankly. So we cannot trust them.
No one should ever forget the dressing down he gave to NATO leaders during his first visit to Europe. I believe it was during the Munich Security Conference.
Yes, he came in, and that was a deeply shocking moment. I mean, I would have liked to be there. I think that's a historic moment. You had the 2007 Putin address at the Munich Security Conference, and then you have whatever it is. My math is going to fail me here. 5, 6, 7, 8 years later. 8 years later, you have Hegseth coming, and I think these are pivotal moments in the ebb and flow of global geopolitics. And unfortunately, Putin's speech to the Munich Security Conference 2007 was a marker. It was a predictor of future events if we'd been paying attention. Unfortunately, I think Hegseth's is much the same there, as well as the address that Trump gave to assembled military commanders. I've seen a couple of good analyses of that, but a lot of trivial analysis. It's a deeply disturbing speech when you look at it, line by line, word by word.
Anybody that saw even some outtakes or excerpts from that meeting that you're talking about a month ago in Quantico, Virginia, where Hegseth and then Trump addressed the most senior military leadership in the United States, should never have any illusions about what's going on in this country. Both the leadership of the military, meaning Hegseth, and the leadership of this country by Trump. That should have quashed anybody's opinion that there's any quality leadership, that these are sane individuals, that they are not insane and supportive, actually, of Russia and anti-democracy. But there are still people who think that they are supportive of democracy and that there's still a way that Trump's going to come around. Well, it's not going to happen.
It seems unlikely, and it's exhausting to follow that. It's much better just to say, do you know what? We need to plan without the US assistance. If the best we can hope for is that they don't side with Russia and get in the way and prevent people from doing things that are positive, but actual physical assistance, it seems unlikely. The same with tomahawks. I think that's just a hollow debate, and that it won't necessarily happen.
Bottom line is, and it can't be said enough, in my opinion, Europe, the EU, and NATO needs, the leaders of the EU and NATO and the individual members need to develop a spine. They need to tell their citizens the truth. The hell with politics. They need to tell them the existential danger they are in from Russian aggression. And they also need to say that we cannot depend on America. That's gone. That ship has sailed. So stop grasping at straws and say, well, maybe, and what if, and no, it's gone. They need to get together as a continent and plan their future and do it now. Don't have these 10-year plans, for example, about how they're going to be prepared to confront Russia in 8 to 10 years. No, they need to be able to confront Russia in about 2 to 3 years maximum. And if they don't do that, well, then there's going to be problems.
That's it. We've talked about some of those problems. I mean, this is one for next time, perhaps. We don't have time to go into this detail, but this is an interesting comment. Stephen Miller is the current president. Stephen Nazi Ferratu Miller, I kind of like that one, filling his power. And of course, if Trump, and there are, very many sort of, armchair diagnostics there. There are several clinicians who've gone on record as doing a sort of remote diagnosis of Trump. And of course, he had a MRI, which is very difficult to explain why you'd have one or even two MRIs in the space of a year without some kind of a real clinical reason for doing it. If he is, let's say, incompetent, incapable of really grasping this detail, it doesn't mean that there's a vacuum in US governance. It means that other figures behind the throne are going to be wielding power. And this is one for next time, perhaps, and the troubling nature of who some of those individuals might be.
Just like you said with Putin, the people that might come after Trump, in my opinion, could actually be worse. And I think we're going to have to leave it on that not so optimistic note for
Putin. It'd be very difficult to be worse than Putin, I have to say. But they're
going to give it a go, I think, though.
They'll give it a go, but they'll be in a much weakened position. So I don't really care who comes after Putin. It just means that there'll be a few years of pause before the next bad guy can get into their stride. But America is still, despite Trump's best efforts, it is immensely powerful in economic and a military sense, immensely powerful with resources unmatched in human history by any other nation or empire. And there's some pretty bad people who have their eyes on that power.
And if we're allowed to have our elections next year, Jonathan, I firmly believe that we will turn things around in this country if we have elections, and I really mean that.
That's it. And we'll touch upon Finland. I need to give a shout out to Finland and Baltics. Yes, they have been preparing for 80 years. Yes, they have. And I think if we're going to tool up and use these couple of years before Russia comes at Europe full scale, then the Finnish example is exactly the one we need to follow.
Exactly.
So,
and that's not what I was talking about, Leto. But people have to criticize. I get that. No, I'm talking about Western Europe. I didn't say the Baltics weren't prepared.
Western and Central Europe.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, listen, we have to leave it here. Folks, next time when we do this, which is every Wednesday at this same time, please have your questions ready. We are ready and able to and want to answer your questions, even get into a debate. You disagree, that's fine. No insults or anything like that, threats and all that crazy stuff, but good, honest debate. I know that I and Jonathan would love to do that. And I think that we're out of time, Jonathan. So for the both of us, thank you very much. And I look forward to next week.
Yep, very much so. And these are important conversations for our times. I look forward to it.
And folks, we already said it, but check out my channel on the at No Delusion Zone on YouTube, at No Delusion Zone, and see you all next week. And thanks for joining us today.
And we're trying to